Hello, Tracy here with some ideas for how to customize the storyline chapters thickers that come in the Outdoorsy kit from MercyTiara Kits. I have the thickers here spread out on my desk so that I can have a look at them. I have a few ideas for some titles that I want to use with the next couple of layouts that I make. Look at how beautiful these thickers are just on their own. As you can see, I did ink 4 of them here. I was going to spell out the word hike for another project that I did, but I ended up not using those letters and I just inked those with distress ink. So that is a technique that I'm actually not going to cover in this video, but it is in this other video that I will link in the information section below, as well as in a card. So I am going to use the word hike on one of these titles that I'm doing. So I'm just pulling out the letters that spell out to hike, because I'm going to use love from another sticker in the kit, and then I'm going to make it say love to hike. And I am going to show you a couple of different things that you can do. For this first set of letter stickers, I want to use my bottles of media here. I have liquid pearls which is a Ranger product. It's a fairly old product, but you can still get it. I also have some stickles here. And if you don't have stickles are an older product, but I believe you can still buy them new. If you don't have stickles, there are a few other brands that make glitter glue that are fairly high end. I wouldn't recommend that you use dollar store glitter glue for this, because my experience with that kind of glitter glue is that it's not that great, or the school glitter glue that I think Crayola makes. It dries too thin. So this is a higher quality craft glitter glue. I think Nuvo makes some, and scrapbook.com has some that you can get that free sometimes with a purchase. I'm also going to be playing around with my Smooch pearlized paint, which is another older product, but if you don't have this, you might have some other kinds of specialty paints on hand. I have some Nuvo liquid drops here that I'm just going to show. Those are called Nuvo crystal drops, actually. I'll show you how those work on letter stickers as well, and I'll show you why I actually don't recommend those. Now, for these first techniques, I'm going to be using unfinished chipboard, and as you can see, this it's Smooch. This Smooch paint really covers nicely. Because the chipboard is unfinished, so I haven't gessoed it or put any coating on it or anything, this Smooch ink is absorbing into the chipboard, and you can see that it's leaving it ends up with a brownish kind of hue to it. It's not the same color that it would be if I was working from a white base. So just keep that in mind as you use this chipboard. And I will show later on how it looks when you use some gesso to give it a bit of a white base. Now, I haven't used any of these media for a long time, so I'm having to kind of deal with clogged bottles, and things have separated and kind of settled in my bottles. This is how Nuvo crystal drops look, and I have done this before on full titles for some of my pages over the years. The problem with Nuvo crystal drops is that they are not made for covering large spaces, and so it will crack, and you'll see that at the end, that as it dries there are little crevices in it, and sometimes that's okay, sometimes that looks fine. But if you're not looking for a really textured, almost like a plasticky textured look, Nuvo crystal drops are probably not the media that you want to choose. Now, I haven't used these liquid pearls in quite some time, so the lid was clogged. You can just pull the little lid out of there, and then I'm just using a toothpick to try to stir this up a little bit, because it had separated into the orangey. This color is called rouge. It had separated into an orangey side and a reddish side, so I'm just kind of trying to mix it up a little bit. And I also just used some warm water to clear out the clog in the top of the bottle, but the rest of the product is fine inside. And so I'm just going to apply this. Now, liquid pearls are a thick-ish kind of a paint. It's somewhere between an acrylic paint and a heavy body acrylic paint. So it's somewhere between those two. And as you can see, you get a different look when you smooth it out with a paintbrush and use it more like a paint than if you just squeeze it on. So see how when I squeeze it on, it's got quite a bit of texture. It looks very plasticky. And that's a totally different look that you might be going for, but I'm going to spread it out a little bit, as you can see. And because this is unfinished chipboard, it is pretty porous and it will absorb this media quite a lot. Now they're moving around on my mat quite a lot, so I'm just going to use some glue to hold them in place so I don't have to use my finger to hold them in place as I use the paintbrush there. So all that I'm doing is I'm just squeezing the bottle to get good coverage over the whole thing, much the same way that you would do with using stickles or any other kind of nozzled glue or product. And then I'm just taking my paintbrush and I'm smoothing it out. It's very thick and I'm getting good full coverage because of that. And that is keeping my color true as well because I'm using such a thick coat of it. You can't really see the brown that's underneath, which is good because these letters are a different color than the T and the O because I had already inked them. Pardon me. So you can see that I used a little toothpick there just to get the product out of the corners so that I could have a nice shape that is consistent with the original shape of the letter stickers. And now I'm just adding a second coat of the shimmers, and I just picked out a couple of letters here that I knew I wouldn't use for another project, the Q and the Z, just to kind of experiment and show you what different products would look like, even though I'm not going to make a title with the smooch ink and I'm not going to make a title with the Nuvo drops. I just wanted to show you on individual letters so you could see what those look like, because we all have different products in our stash. I'm just encouraging you to just kind of pull out what you've got on hand and maybe play around with some letters that you think you might not use, just to get a sense of what it's going to look like before you commit to doing an entire title out of something like this. So as you can see, I'm just layering some of these orange stickles on top of the rouge liquid pearls. Now, I would not recommend that you use stickles without a coat of paint underneath, unless if you don't mind the brown showing through, because when stickles dry, they do dry nice and dense, a lot more dense than dollar store or school supply kinds of glitter glues. They will still spread out a little bit and you will see some of the material underneath. So you just want to make sure that you're okay with that. I wasn't, so that's why I gave it a coat of the reddish orange first. So now I'm moving on to another idea, but before I did, I thought it might be nice to just include a little unbrushed version of liquid pearls so that you could see what it looks like when it dries without using a brush to smooth it down, and also how it looks without adding the stickles on top. So I just took another cue and I actually combined two different colors there just because I was accidentally using the wrong color. So now my second title that I'm going to do, besides the Love to Hike title, which is already done, and it'll take a long time to dry, but I will show it at the end in a photo. My second title is going to be called Connection. It's going to be for a black and white photo of my husband with our nephews sitting on the couch, and they're reading him stories and showing him things that they're interested in during a recent trip that we had to their house. So I'm going to give this word connection a gold dipped look. This is one of my very favorite things to do with an unfinished chipboard piece. And so I'll show you this. I've done this before. If you've followed me for a while, you might have seen this before, but it's been a while, so I thought it was worth revisiting this technique. I actually own two different kinds of gold embossing powder, so I took them both out. I'm going to try one on a sample letter, so I got this 9, and I'll try out my technique on this just so I can remember how it works. I'm just basically using my ink pad as a straight edge and dabbing it onto the letter. So you can see that it definitely discolors the letter there because that's Versamark ink, which is a sticky glue. And then I just poured some embossing powder on it and embossed it with my heat gun. And I adore that look. I especially love the contrast of the shiny gold and the unfinished chipboard. It's a really nice kind of combination of something rugged and something a little bit more elegant. And I really love that look. Now, when I stamped the glue on the TION, it see how it's not at the halfway point? And, I was thinking about, well, it doesn't have to be perfect or whatever, but I'm going to end up re-inking that because I would like it to be more on the halfway point than kind of creeping up the letters as they go. So I liked the look of the Stampin' Up! Gold embossing powder so much that I didn't even end up trying the second brand. I had Stampendous, or I forget what that brand was called, but I decided to just stick with the Stampin' Up! Brand because I really liked how it looked. And so I'm using a coffee filter to hold my embossing powder. You could use a little piece of paper that's got a fold in it so it's easy to kind of direct that powder back into the container, or you could use one of those little trays that are specifically designed for embossing powder. So see how I just re-inked that, and it's quite a bit better. It's more at the halfway point. I just wasn't paying attention when I inked it the second time, so I didn't do a good job of that, but these are much better. I happen to have enough letters to be able to try again, so that's what I did. Now with that O, I actually used my thumb, and I had a bit of ink. Unbeknownst to me, there was some ink, some of that sticky ink on my thumb, and so that wasn't actually a good idea because I ended up getting ink on the top of the O, but that's all right. So I have an extra O here because I messed up, but I ended up figuring out that I could fix it. So even though I got a bit of stray powder on this one, it turns out it's going to work okay. I just throw away that coffee filter when I'm done. That's one of the things I love about it, is that I don't have to clean up another tool. I do have one of those special plastic trays with the hole in the bottom of it for channeling the powder back into the container, but it's just not worth it to me to have to tidy that up when coffee filters are so easy to find, and you get hundreds in one package. So I don't mind throwing them away. So I'm just using my little tweezers here because it allows me to hold on to these and not have my finger be burnt. Do be careful when you're working with a heat gun because it gets very, very hot and you don't want to burn your fingers. These are reverse tweezers, so they stay tweezed shut when you're not holding them. You have to squeeze them to release and let go for it to hold them. So these are handy tools to have in your scrap room. I think they're made by EK Success, but there's probably a couple of different companies that make these reverse tweezers. So there you go. And almost finished here. I just love how this looks. And it gives a little bit of a more sophisticated look to these unfinished chipboard pieces. I love the touch of gold, and I love the dipped look. A couple years ago, this dipped look was happening on all of our products. There were tons and tons of letter stickers that had this dipped look, but we don't see it quite as often these days, but I still really like it. I think it's a timeless look, so I like being able to kind of revisit a trend that we haven't seen for a while. It's always nice to mix it up a little bit. Now, my last title is going to be called S'mores, and I'm going to put a little apostrophe in there. I'm grabbing a 5 and a Z because I'm going to play around with a couple. This is the photo I'm going to use for this one. And I'm just thinking about what kind of coloration I might want to use here. For this one, I'm going to actually paint my letter stickers, but I'm pulling out a couple of other stray letters that I don't think I'll use for other titles so that I can just play around with a couple of different looks before I decide what I want to do. So I have my little basket of paint here, and I have some paint tubes here from a bunch of different brands, but the ones that I keep pulling out are the Color Theory ones by Studio Calico. Now, I don't have a whole lot of those. My friend gave them to me when she was destashing, and a lot of them are dried up. I don't know how old they are. They're probably fairly old, and any ones that have been opened have been dried up. This has been my experience with any paint that is made by a scrapbooking or a craft company instead of paint that's made by an artist paint company, like actual paint brands like Liquitex or Golden. And so as you can see, all of them, the color is stuck in the tube and there's just like liquid, like a watery liquid coming out. Now these ones were not opened yet, this particular color. So this color is fine and I'm going to use it. But just keep in mind when you're buying paints that you want to, if you're spending a whole lot of money, you should be cautious that you're using a reputable paint brand. Especially if you're buying all the colors, right? Because you're not going to use those for years and years and years. I've never had my Liquitex paints dry up on me. Sometimes they're dry around the, around the tube, but once you clear the clog, the paint inside is fine. So what I've decided to do here is try using some gesso on some of these letter stickers just to show the difference, because I've been mentioning that some of these products are kind of like being absorbed into the letters, and you can see that there's a bit of a grayish or brownish background color showing through, or it's sort of like the paint is not sitting on top of the letter sticker. It's kind of absorbing in and changing the color, the resulting color. So I grabbed my gesso. I have golden gesso, but there's a lot of different brands of gesso that you can use for this. And you can see how once I use the gesso, and I'm just using a fairly thin coat of it, I put it on fairly thick, but then I used a paintbrush to really thin it out. And so it dries fairly quickly. And although this 5 is a little bit thicker, so it's not drying quite as quick, but you can see that when I use the exact same color paint and apply it on top of the gesso finished letter stickers, I get a more true to color version of that minty color of green. It's brighter and it's more like the color of the paint itself. So the painted letter stickers look really great. I like how they look, especially with the gesso underneath of it. If you were going for a darker, more woodsy kind of look, I do like them without the gesso, but for the purposes of the page that I have in mind, I'm going to go with the gesso. So this is why it's good to just take some of these extra letter stickers and just play around and experiment before you commit to what you're going to do with the letter stickers that are actually going to be used for your title. So I went into my stash and I pulled out, I have a subcategory of stamps called background stamps. I have a couple of different background stamps here. I don't have a ton, but I have enough. And so I picked out some that had a fairly tight pattern to them. So those dots I think are a bit too spread out for this size of letter stickers. I don't think you're going to see them as much, but that graphic kind of pattern would be good, but it's just not what I have in mind. I also have a stencil here. So I'm going to show you two different options that you can take. Obviously these letter stickers look really great just painted, but I'm going to show you a couple of options to take it up even one more notch to add a bit of a pattern to these painted letter stickers. So I'm taking the V8 and Z. The V does not have gesso and the 8 and Z do. And I'm just going to use this Brilliance ink pad. You could use any color of ink here, but I thought that this gold Brilliance, it's called Galaxy Gold, would give me a really nice subtle look. And I love it. It looks so great. Obviously, black ink would stamp really well and give you a nice bold pattern. Anything that would provide a bit of contrast will work really well with this technique. And as you can see, it just gives you this really subtle little pattern on my letter stickers. It does not interfere with the legibility of the letters at all. And I really, really love that look. Now, I wasn't sure how the stencil would work out because this is a fairly, even though it's a tight pattern, it's still a little bit big for these letter stickers, but I thought I'd just give it a try just to see how it would look. And it turns out I really like the look even better than I thought it would. I'm using Distress Oxide here. The color is Antique Linen, and I'm just pouncing on top of it with a little finger dauber. And look at that. I really love how that looks. It's very subtle and you can't necessarily tell that it's hexagons, but it does add just a little bit of interest to those letter stickers. And I think that that would look great too. It's not the color I'm going to go for my title here with s'mores letters, but I think it's a really great option. So I thought I'd just pull over all of these different little experimental ones that I did. Here you can see that there's a little bit of cracking that's happening in the Z as it dries, but these other ones look really great. I love how they look actually. So I'm going to pull down my letters. Now that I've done a little bit of experimenting, I have a bit of a sense of what I want to do. I know that for this layout, I'm going to want to use some gesso. So because this is the version that's going to actually go on my layout, I'm going to be a little bit more conservative with my use of the gesso. As you remember, at first I just kind of like blobbed it all on and then spread it around on my little experimental letters, but on these I'm just putting a thinner coat. Gesso does a really good job of sealing in your product, like whatever media you're gessoing over. It provides a little bit of a seal and also a white base. You can get clear gesso that does not give you a white base but will seal in your letters, so that's an option if you didn't want a white look. But here, in this case, I did want the white look. Gesso also dries really quickly, and like I said, it just keeps that chipboard from absorbing up the ink when I put it on it, or the paint when I put it on it. So I'm really pleased with that. I'm going to go wash my brush because gesso will be difficult to get out of your brushes, so do wash them while it's still wet. So I'm back to using that same ink. Again, it's that Color Theory ink from Studio Calico. And I'm putting a thin coat on this. And I'm just, putting it on fairly thin. And you can see a little bit of white through this because I'm putting it on so thin that, you can see a little bit of white. So I'm going to go back and put a second coat on there. What I'm doing here with the toothpick is I'm just making sure that there's no gobs of paint that are accumulating in the corners and edges of these letter stickers that just, like once I move these off of the work mat, I don't want there to be little gobs in the little corners because that'll make it look just a little bit messy. So taking the toothpick to smooth out any little ridges really helps. And using that toothpick actually sometimes will form a little ridge on the edges of your letter stickers. So I'm just taking my brush and smoothing that out before I'm done. As you can see, I wasn't 100% patient and I didn't let that dry all that well in between the two coats, but it was dry enough that I was able to get a thicker coat on there. So I just took a dry brush at the end there and brushed out any little, they're still not 100% dry, so I'm just using a dry brush to even out any little gobby areas on there. Now, this stamp is not wide enough to stamp the whole image across that whole word, so I just broke it down into the SMO and the RES. Ooh, I'm really liking how that's looking. I keep getting distracted by my other little samples that are up there, but I like how that looks. So I'm using the Brilliance Galaxy Gold ink again here, and I'm just going to ink it, apply that ink onto the background stamp, and I'm just waiting for the paint to dry here. Check in with the stickles and the perfect pearls, and this is how this one is drying. It's almost dry now, so I just wanted to do a little update on how that's looking as it dries. And you can see more and more of that reddish color underneath, or the pinky color underneath of the orange, the more it dries. So I'm glad that I have that base coat of liquid pearls underneath that just peeks out in between some of the glitter. So I just applied that ink to my acrylic stamp here, or photopolymer stamp, and that just gives me this beautiful subtle, I'm going to wash it off with my wet cloth here. That's a lint-free cloth. It's just an old t-shirt. And I'm going to move this onto a piece of wax paper so that I can have it set aside for the next time I scrapbook. If I want to do my s'mores photo, I have the title already here. And here's just a still shot of that. Love how that turned out. Now, before I share the photos, just a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters. These folks help make this channel happen, so big thanks to all of them. Patrons get early access to all my process videos and real-time unedited versions of my videos, as well as a monthly live stream and some behind the scenes. For example, they got a real time of me playing around with all of this media that wasn't edited, and they got to kind of see things as I had my ideas and tried different things. So here are some of the close-ups of these completed titles. I really love how they turned out. Now this one might be a little bit more neon and bright than what I was expecting, but I'm going to give it a go and see if I can use it on the page that I have in mind. I can always alter it if I need to, but I like how it looks. So thanks so much for watching. You can check out some of these other videos and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Take great care and have a really great scrappy week.